I want to welcome you to the show, Lauren. As we talked about before we started recording, what you're doing is kind of exactly what we're trying to spread the message about. The food freedom, the body acceptance, the finding a totally new relationship with the world. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you. I think there is sometimes too much focus on just the physical, and the mental and emotional and spiritual kind of gets left behind. And sometimes when I say things like, oh, eat food that makes you feel good, sometimes I think that gets misinterpreted as, is just what you're craving in the moment, just what your tongue wants, and not taking into consideration how your body feels, if it aligns with your values, and all of that other stuff. So I try to make sure I point out all of the different ways that we want to feel good, not
Yeah.
just physically.
It's interesting that because it's almost like when you're dieting, and first, can I ask you to kind of define what would be chronic dieting versus someone who maybe tries one and decides, okay, not for me. What would be the parameters of a chronic dieter?
Yeah, it's a really great question because I think sometimes people think that that just means, doing Weight Watchers multiple times or doing Noom, doing keto, like these well-known diets. But chronic dieting can also be, I've always watched my calories, I've always cut my carbs, I track my macros, something that is basically restriction. Like if you're chronically restricting in one way or the other, whether it's points, macros, color food, right? Like with Noom, where that's the red, yellow, green, the stoplight system, whatever it is. That's kind of what I would say is chronic dieting. And again, it doesn't have to be these very like structured meal plans. It doesn't have to be something that has a branded name or is this big company. It can really just be as simple as, oh, I don't eat those kind of foods, or I think those foods are bad. And it's a lot more common than I think people realize because it's really normalized to just kind of always quote unquote watch what you're eating.
And the part that you mentioned too about it could be one of the food rules that you have that makes it chronic dieting. For example, I've known people, and I've been this person, who didn't have the bread on a sandwich
Yep.
or who took the cheese off of a pizza, not because you're lactose intolerant or because dairy gives you issues, but because you don't want that fat, right?
Yep.
It's
Yep.
just it's there's so many small things that people do and you don't even think twice when you see it happen because it's so normalized.
For sure. I have been that person too, like just trying to reduce calories as much as possible with like little tips and tricks. And I think every magazine article we read growing up was kind of all about that, right? Like dab your pizza and opt for this instead of that. And I think it's important to note that all of this is a spectrum. Obviously, there's people that might be able to engage in some of those behaviors and feel like mentally very fine with it. It doesn't cause stress and they're able to kind of carry out their life. And there's other people where it might not be obvious on the surface, but underneath, there's a lot of guilt and shame and rumination and just a lot of mental real estate being occupied by food. So it's obviously a spectrum and a continuum.
I know you're certified as a trainer. I'm certified as a trainer. I do feel that in having worked with men as well, that this sometimes the compartmentalization is a little bit easier in that aspect of I can do this dieting, I can follow this crazy, all these food rules, and it doesn't actually impact my self-worth or my mental real estate. Not every man, of course,
Sure.
but I don't know if you find this as well. You've been doing it a while. Like, is there this, and not every woman feels that it's so difficult either, but like, do you notice any of the trends in that way?
Women have always been taught that their worth lies in their body, how thin it is, how young it looks, how toned it is, whatever you want to say, how wrinkle free it is, how gray hair free it is, whatever, anything about how the body looks. Whereas I think men heard a much different message growing up. I mean, if you just look at the things that were in like 17 magazine versus what boys were reading, it was everything that we read was like how to get a boy to like you, how to be hot, how to have your hair look pretty this summer, how to do your makeup. Like everything was so looks oriented. And I think there's a lot of pressure on men. But I feel like men often grow up hearing that they're powerful, that their worth lies in other things, right? Like that they're strong and they can do this and they can be whatever they want to be. And it's very much about like other things other than how their body looks. It's like everything
Yeah.
besides that.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned 17 magazine because that was definitely my era growing up. And if you kind of replaced, if you showed some of those articles to guys and you said, "Oh, this is for you to read. This is for you. This is this quiz. Remember all the quizzes is for
Yes.
you to take," and what that reaction would be.
They'd be like, "Why am I doing this?" Because it wouldn't make sense, but yet we were doing it without even thinking that it was weird. Times were different.
Yeah, but that's part of the evolution, and I think this is where it would be amazing to hear your story because it seems like you became a registered dietitian before you did intuitive eating, which is really interesting. And while you were an RD, if I've got this timeline right, you were also at one point a bikini competitor.
Correct, correct. Weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I feel like in going to school to become a registered dietitian, so much of that schooling was weight centric, BMI, how to lose weight, cut your calories, blah, blah, blah. Well, I guess I can I'll start from the beginning. I'll rewind a little bit, but I'll give you the spark notes. So I think like most people, as we were just saying, I didn't like my body in high school. I dieted. I was obsessed with calories and working out and trying to be thin. And as we know, the more you do that, the more you think about food. And I always just thought I'm really passionate about food. Like this is my hobby kind of thing, which I think a lot of people could probably relate to. And so I was like, oh, I'll go to college to study this because I'm thinking about it all the time. But also part of me kind of thought that there would be some like secret code that I'd figure out. Like I'd figure out the recipe of like how to lose weight for good and keep it off and all of that stuff. So I had a friend at the time because I had always been into working out and sports and all of that growing up. And I had a friend who was like, you might want to try out bodybuilding. Like you work out a lot already. That might be a cool way to try to like pivot your career. And I was like, cool, I'll try that. I was already so obsessed with like my body looking a certain way. And plus, I had just broken up with this person. So it felt kind of like this way to get revenge of like, oh, you'll see, look how great I'm going to look. So I started competing. And I remember when I first started, I was like, I'm a dietitian. I know the importance of good nutrition and making sure that I have variety and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to end up being one of those like gym bros that only eats broccoli and chicken and rice. So I started out with like trying to do like flexible dieting, but I had no idea how to be a bodybuilder. Like I knew how to like count macros, but I didn't know really what I was doing. Anyways, I ended up getting really into the sport. I went on to a team with this very famous bodybuilder, and he ended up giving out meal plans. And so, as I'm sure you're familiar with, the more you diet, the stronger your lack of trust becomes in your body, right? It's like, I don't know how to do this. I have to have someone else tell me what to do. So I stopped trusting myself and I started following this person's meal plan, which was very bro bodybuilder, as you can imagine, egg whites and all of that stuff. During that time, however, I started binging and purging. I had like my first off season, put weight back on in order to put more muscle on. And it was really hard to do that because I had just lost all this weight and my body fat was so low and people were really like applauding me. And, on Facebook and Instagram at the time, it was like people were so impressed. And I just was so scared to go back to the version of me before that because I felt like people were so impressed with this new version of me. And that stress kind of triggered some of that for me. So that kind of continued for a couple years. And then I kind of got to a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. This like, what's the point? Like it's not like there's a lot of money in the sport. Like I'm kind of just spending a lot of money. I'm making myself sick here. And then a friend of mine who I did my dietetic internship with, she probably saw what I was doing and was like, hey, perhaps you should come with me to this retreat. And they're talking all about health at every size and intuitive eating. And so that was really my first introduction to it, was on this like professional retreat for dietitians and therapists. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, this sounds like this could be really, really helpful. So I kind of just absorbed and consumed everything I could, all the books, all the podcasts. And so that was like my first exposure to it. And I saw how transformative it was for my relationship with food and body and exercise, that after a couple years, I was like, I think I want to really, like narrow down my practice. I kind of just want to focus on this. I think there's so many people that could benefit from it. I know for so long, I always just thought I'd struggle with food for the rest of my life. And I'm like, well, everyone's kind of doing this. So I guess this is just how it is. I guess we all just have to kind of like suffer together. This is the price we pay. And so once I saw that there was kind of this way out, I was like, people need to know about this. I went and got certified and here we are.
Yeah. What you didn't mention in this is that when you were doing the bikini competition, is that you placed, and not only did you place, you got first place.
I
More
did.
than
Yeah.
once, right? It happened.
I did. I placed first at like a local show. And then once you place a certain way at a local show, you go on to national shows. And my first one, I got like seventh place. And then April of 2015, I won like the overall at a local show out in Pittsburgh. So there was like open and novice, and then the overall open and novice. I won that too. It was really exciting. And then I went down to South Carolina for the show called Junior USA's, and I won my class there. But the way that it worked with Going Pro was that all of the classes, so I think it was like A through F, all of those first place people would then go against each other. And I think I placed like fourth out of eighth, and you needed to be one, two, or three. So I missed going pro by like one person. And I obviously was like devastated at the time. But looking back, I feel like it was the universe or God or whoever's way of just being like, this is part of your path. Like, you're not meant to go that way. I think I would have ended up like, I was sick, but I think I would have been in a really, really dark place had I gone down that way. So I look back and kind of, I'm thankful that it worked out that way.
And I mention it because it's not as if you were just dabbling in this. This was very to emphasize to people what a big shift that is, to be
Yeah.
someone who was almost in those top 3, almost pro, which requires an extreme level of obsessiveness and discipline, right, to get to
Mhm.
that point,
Mhm.
and then to be open to a completely different framework, to not have maybe you had a little resistance in believing it, but obviously you wanted to believe there was another way. So I think that that's incredible because a lot of us in the intuitive eating space or in food freedom and health at every size, I think most of us have this journey of dieting, chronic dieting,
Mhm.
even disordered eating, and then becoming open to more things. But you had quite the extreme version of the fitness world. Like if we talk about the fitness world being diet centric, you
Yeah.
were in the center.
Yeah.
You
It
were
was.
that pinprick.
It was, thank you for saying that because it feels like so long ago at this point that it's almost hard to access that version of me. I feel
Yeah.
so different. Like my mind is wired so differently at this point. But hearing you say that just makes me want to share with everyone listening that like you can change the way that you think and your beliefs and your relationship with food. Like I used to be so disordered in the way that I thought about how bodies should look. And as you said, like it takes so much obsession and I don't want to call it discipline because it was for me it was more disorder. But to go from one way of thinking to now feeling like all bodies deserve respect and all bodies are good and we should honor it. It's just like change is possible is what I'm trying to say here.
No, and I think that the distinction you made about discipline is really important, that there's kind of like this shadow side of discipline that we think
Mhm.
about where it borders on that disorder for sure. Tracking every single bite of food all the time and always obsessively looking at every menu before you go out because you won't have
Mhm.
anything else or you won't go there. And then the discipline of, oh, I've got my day, I structure my routine, like that kind of thing, which is a little bit more nourishing.
Yes, it's like what's the intention behind the discipline is one so that it's supportive and like meeting your needs and making sure your cup stays full and like getting things done that you need to get done versus it's based in restriction and at the core of it for me at least was like a deep self-hatred basically or hatred of how my body looked.
What do you think, because since you made this journey yourself of going from dieting to then being intuitive eating, having a completely different relationship with food in your body and then helping others to do it, what are kind of some of the biggest blocks that stop people from making that transition? What are the fears that they have? What are the anxieties that they experience that you've
Mhm.
seen, or maybe you even experienced? But also, I think seeing in other people too is really helpful to understand.
I think there's two main fears. The first one is the fear that if you give yourself permission to eat, that you'll never stop eating, that all you'll eat is the cakes, the cookies, desserts, the, like less nutrient dense foods, those play foods that we'd call them. There's that fear of like, hey, I'm just going to eat that for the rest of my life. And how could that possibly be healthy? And I think the second fear is weight changes, your body changing and how that's going to look and how that's going to feel. And that's a scary thing. Again, we've been taught our whole lives that our worth is dependent on how our body looks. And so when you give up that control and you don't know how it's going to look, that's really scary for a lot of people.
And what's kind of the first step, acknowledging that for each person it might be a little different, but kind of what's the first step? Because I know something that you do, which is fantastic, is that there's the intuitive eating book, the Bible, so to speak, on
Yes.
what to do. And some people struggle with the execution of it or the interpretation of it. So I know for you, a
Mhm.
lot of your work is help guiding them to
Yeah.
implement that framework. So what
Yes.
is one of the mindset work, or one of the shifts, or one of the actions that can kind of help people with that fear, especially the weight gain? Because I know for me that was a huge one in coming into this world.
Yeah, it's scary. Well, I think similar to the framework itself is rejecting the diet mentality. That's the first principle, is going over all of the different ways that dieting has robbed you. Your time, your energy, your money, how it's harmed you. Has it worked in the past? Has it gotten you to where you want to go? Again, how much money have you spent between pills and creams and trainers and meal plans and detoxes and juices? Like how much money have you spent? And how much time do you spend looking at YouTube videos or TikToks or reading blog articles or I don't know, watching anything else about weight loss and even just your presence, different events, weddings. I know I went to my cousin's wedding in 2016, and I like brought a cooler of food, and I hope she doesn't listen to this. Like, I don't really remember the wedding all that much because I was like a couple weeks out from a show. And I was so focused on my food and how my body looked that I like wasn't able to be there 100% for this really special moment of like this person that matters a lot to me in my life. So I think that can be a really powerful first step, is really like identifying what dieting has taken from you and really stepping back and be like, is this actually working for me? Do I want to keep doing this for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Is it making me feel fulfilled? Is it making me happy? And if not, here's this other way.
I think most people listening who are struggling with this, that it's bordering on disordered. You know that it's taking your time. You know it's taking your money. You know it's
Mhm.
making you unhappy. But it's almost this live for today mentality of, well, I just have to do this today. And then I just have to do it tomorrow. You don't
Mhm.
think about today and tomorrow becoming 10 years, 20 years. I
Mhm.
mean, for some people, it's multiple decades of this. And if you
Yeah.
think about it that way, like you said, like calculating what you actually lose when you diet, not what you gain, but what you lose, the time, the money, the mental space, the confidence
Mhm.
is kind of almost, you can't calculate it, can you? It's invaluable.
You can. I think it's a very hard exercise for a lot of people to do. It's
Yeah.
really upsetting because, like you said, you're just focused on today and you don't ever take that time to zoom out and really see, hey, I've been doing this since I'm 11. I've been doing this since I was 14. And a lot of times people were put on diets not by their own doing, right? Like by parents or caretakers or whatever. But, you know, I know for me, the first time I examined that, I was so pissed. Like, I was like, I could have gone on so many vacations. I could have bought a car. I could have like done all of these things. Like, I could have, I don't know, just like I said, the wedding, just so many things that I was like, what? Why? What is the point? Like, life is so short. And I know for me personally, I felt so physically bad because I had digestive issues. My mood was really bad. And I think a lot of times what makes this work that much trickier is when you have digestive issues or you have any of these other ailments. Sometimes people recommend cutting things out of your diet, which then makes it even more it just kind of adds fuel to the fire. So I know for me, it was like I was having all of these, like I had no energy. I was moody and anxious and depressed and horrible digestion. I was like, what is the point of trying to look a certain way if I'm literally just miserable in my life? I'm just kind of spinning my wheels for what? Like, for what? What is this getting me?
This is where it's almost beautiful that it's not almost, it is beautiful that you're doing this work because you can really understand how difficult that exercise is, especially if you're someone who has been doing this for decades. That
Hmm.
the pain of looking back and actually see the regret that you might feel from missing those
Yeah.
opportunities, it's almost as if you don't want to see it. You don't want to see it. That it's easier to just pretend that that wasn't happening and continue to do
Hmm.
it for more decades than it is to stop and look back and realize, wow, like I really didn't experience that moment. To not do that from a place of judgment of, well, I should have done this that way, you
Yeah.
know?
Like compassion.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
compassion. Yeah, to
Yeah.
understand that you were thinking differently then and you were in a different frame of mind, and those of us who grew up with 17 magazine had a lot more, like, influences in our mind than maybe today there's more perspectives, which is nice.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what makes leaving dieting behind so tricky is that there's always something like the latest and greatest claiming to be the thing that really works. And I'm sure you've heard this analogy before, but to me, it really feels like an abusive partner, an abusive ex boyfriend that promises they're going to be better, promise they're going to change. I'm so different now. Like, we're going to make this work. And, when you're not together anymore, you look back and you just remember all the good things about it. And you kind of have these rose colored glasses on. And then you get back together or you get back on the diet and it's the same old stuff over and over again. And it's like at some point, you got to kind of just get out of that relationship. But I think sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom. And I know they talk about that in the intuitive eating book is like having to get to this like really low point where it's like, I can't do this. I gotta make a change here.
For
Mhm.
those that maybe haven't reached that point and they're just kind of curious about changing, moving away from dieting, is there a way because I see one of the biggest blocks for those people to look at intuitive eating is
Mhm.
this misconception about what it is.
Yeah.
That it's this idea of it's just free for all. I'm just
Mhm.
gonna have everything and it's going to be the way that I eat all the time. And if I fancy this, I will have this all the time. And I'm gonna make decisions in the same linear way. Now I'm gonna choose it just because I want it. Can
Mhm.
you speak a little bit about that? Because I know that that's a big reason why people don't pursue it further.
I think everyone, myself included, has that initial reaction to it. I was like, so we're just supposed to tell people to like eat french fries all the time if they want french fries? Like, how's that going to be healthy? But I think the simplest way to put it is this framework is about honoring your body, and your tongue's not the only part of your body to honor. Your taste buds aren't the only part of your body to honor, right? If something feels, you eat something and you immediately get terrible reflux or you have diarrhea, like that's a cue from your body that maybe that doesn't feel so good to you. Or you eat something and you are really, 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 really full. That's a cue from your body of like, hey, I think that, we missed the mark of comfortable fullness here. So simply put, your tongue it's not the only part to honor.
That's amazing distinction. I think that's something that people can grasp like this, that it's not just yeah, that it's not just taste, that it goes beyond that to how's the rest of your body going to feel when you
Yes.
have this. And to even just the energy levels, right? Maybe you don't
Mhm.
have digestive issues, but maybe you feel completely exhausted because of the food choices that you're continually making.
Exactly, exactly, and
Yeah.
it's like if you have only one type of food, even if that is a nutrient dense food, let's call it like if you have only broccoli, you're probably gonna get gas, right? You're gonna those cruciferous vegetables get you, like, yeah, there's vitamins in it and stuff, but you're probably gonna get gas because the point is to have variety of all different foods, right? So we're not saying just eat cakes, cookies, and pizza, just like we're saying don't only eat broccoli, cauliflower, and carrots. Like, you're not going to feel good either way.
What do you think is kind of a mini final question for you before we get into how people can work with you and the ways that you really help them is what is a mini step that you give to clients when they first come in? Is there a small thing they can do or sit with or think about that can start to challenge that fear so that they can
Mhm.
move forward and really listen to a new approach without blocking it out because they're afraid they'll fail?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things in there, right? Like hearing you say they think they'll fail is something that I would emphasize with them, that there isn't failing in this process. It's all about being observational and being non-judgmental and being compassionate, like you mentioned before. So I think that in and of itself can be a really big win when people are able to just notice what's happening without shaming and feeling guilty for their choices. I'd also encourage people to just slow down a little bit in the day. It doesn't mean like quit your job and meditate for the whole day, but just like 2 seconds here, 5 seconds there, 10 seconds there. Check in, ask your body, how am I feeling right now? Because this whole process is about reconnecting to your cues, rebuilding that trust. And that's what that fear is like, I can't trust my body. And it's hard to trust your body if you're not even listening to it. So I think just slowing down, taking a second to really ask, like, hey, how's my body physically feel? Am I noticing any thoughts coming up? Just checking in, kind of like you will with a friend, like, hey, how are you really doing? Do that with yourself.
This is the key thing, and I think you said this before, is that there's like this inverse relationship between dieting and body trust. And as you
Mhm.
have more body trust or as you diet less, that increases. So it's almost as if the more you experiment with this, the
Mhm.
easier it becomes, if that makes
Yeah.
sense to people. I think that that's a really big one. And I know that this is one tiny tenet of what you do. So would love to ask you a little bit about what are the ways that you work with people? What are your programs? And then
Mhm.
to really finish on the decks of affirmation.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple online courses available for people, kind of depending on where you're at in your journey. My Feel Good for Life program is like an intuitive eating fundamentals. So that is if you are really ready to hop into the framework, you want to know all 10 principles, you kind of want to master them, you want to go through everything step by step. That is my Feel Good for Life course. That's a really great place to start. And then I have a Feel Your Fullness course. That's for people that have kind of dipped their toes in these waters already. They've maybe explored the framework on their own, but they're still finding that the fullness piece is really tricky for them. I've noticed people say things like, "Oh, I don't feel guilty for eating anymore. I'm not dieting, but I still find myself constantly eating beyond comfortable fullness." And I'd really like to kind of fine tune that a little bit. So that's what it's a mini course. So that's what that mini course is about. And then, as you mentioned, I have like my little flashcards, which are kind of a nice supplement, whether you're doing this work with a dietitian or a therapist or a coach or whoever, or you're just kind of doing things on your own. The reason I created these cards was I was working with a client, and I remember she said to me, she's like, I can't even think of something nice or positive or even neutral to say to myself. Like, I don't like, I'm trying to replace that negative track in my head, but I can't even think of anything. So we were in conversation. I'm like, how about this? How about that? And she's like, can you write those down for me? And I'm like, I think people might need this. So I created a whole deck. One is called Feel Good Flashcards. They're for food freedom and body acceptance. I have one right here. It says, I do not need to earn my food. Just like little affirmations, things that you can repeat to yourself to replace that negative old thought pattern track that's been playing for years. I have one about fitness as well. Things like movement is a celebration of what my body can do. All movement counts. And then I have one for kids too, which is I'm so excited for these. Like I think they're just so cute. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but they're so cute. Like I've
Toot
had
away.
people yeah, I've had some people send me videos of like them using them with their kids, and it literally brings me to tears because as we've said multiple times in this conversation, the things we read in 17 magazine, like I just I feel like had we heard different messaging, the trajectory of our lives would have probably been really different, which is like I hate to say that, but I think today's children are going to be set up really nicely for having a positive relationship with food and body. And that's what all of them are about. It's teaching kids how to set boundaries, how to say no, that their feelings are okay, that all bodies are different, they come in different shapes and sizes, that food gives them energy to play, all these like really positive messages about nutrition rather than the things that we heard about cut this, cut that, don't eat this, don't eat that.
Yeah, it's I love that you mentioned how you created these because it's exactly that self-talk, isn't it? And it's
Yeah.
so important to have a different thought playing in your mind,
Mhm.
not, "Oh, I'm too big for this," or
Yeah.
"I'm not attractive because of this," or
Mhm.
"I'm failing at this," or "I don't have discipline at this," and to be able
Mhm.
to have a different thought, and it's almost like you can make it a little ritual where you
Yeah.
take out a card each day, you read it in the
Yes.
morning, you put it on the table to your kid while they're eating, just like
Mhm.
something to establish every day a different thought direction is really
Yes.
beautiful because you're right, like, sometimes we can't remember what to say, we can't think about something good, it's hard,
Mhm.
or maybe we don't wanna say the same thing every day.
Mhm. Right, so it can change it up. I know I have people do
Yeah.
exactly what you mentioned where it's almost like picking a mantra for the day. They
Yeah.
have it, like, on their computer or whatever. I think it's a really good, like, break in case of emergency type of tool where, like, you just went in your closet and you're feeling some type of way about your body and you're like, "Okay, you know what? Instead of going into this shame spiral and engaging in these behaviors that I'm trying to actively get away from, let me turn to this tool that's actually going to support me." And I think that's what so much of this work is like you're never going I was listening to one of your other episodes earlier in the day and you both touched on eh, that this work isn't about getting to a place where you never have challenging
Yeah.
body image moments. It's just creating a pause and not turning to those destructive behaviors. It's just okay, it was a moment and here's how I support myself in this moment and then I can move on. And that's kind of what I see these as is like a nice tool to support you in those moments.
Yeah, and I wonder too, like, you know how a lot of people have the habit of every morning they go and weigh themselves? That's something that
Mhm.
many people do. That sometimes instead of completely erasing a habit, it's helpful to replace one, and instead
Yes.
of walking to the scale, you take out your feel good flashcard.
Yes. I love that you just said that. I don't know if you happened to see that I did this, but in November, I did like a no way November challenge. And
Ooh.
that was the whole thing was exactly what you just said. Instead of getting on the scale, you're going to replace that habit with reciting affirmations for
Oh, I
30
love that.
days and see how it goes. And yeah, just such a more supportive way to start the morning off.
That's beautiful. Well, if people wanna know more about the programs and the flashcards, where can they find you? Where can they find them? How can they connect?
Yeah, so everything is on my website. It's just laurencadillac.com. And then all the links are also on my social media. So TikTok and Instagram, it's Feel Good Dietitian is my handle.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lauren, for coming on the show. And I really admire your work so much that you
Thank
have
you.
so many different ways to work with people and to make it accessible, which is really important.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was awesome chatting with you.